All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at one of the chapters in a book called Mastering the Art of Spotting the Top 20 Relationship Red Flags.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. It is. And this book was written by L. Robinson.
Okay.
And what's really cool about this is that L. Robinson, who, by the way, is a minister, collaborated with a couple of therapists and a psychologist on this book. So
That's awesome.
Really getting some good information in here.
That's great.
Yeah, and the chapter that we're going to be looking at today is all about what L. Robinson calls the anger spike.
The anger spike.
Which is one of the 20 relationship red flags.
Gotcha.
That are described in this book. And to kind of illustrate how this red flag can manifest in a relationship, the author uses a story about a fictional couple.
Okay.
Named Melanie and Chris, who live in Monterey.
Okay, so like a beautiful backdrop.
Yeah, beautiful backdrop for some not so pretty stuff.
Yeah, that's often the case, right?
Right.
Like when things look perfect on the outside and then you kind of peek behind the curtain, you're like, whoa, what's going on here?
Exactly. And in this particular story, Chris is struggling with a lot of stress and insecurity in his life. And that leads to frequent anger outbursts.
Okay.
Now, the book is very clear that the anger outbursts are not physical. But even without physical violence, they create a lot of tension in the relationship.
Yeah, for sure.
And they have a very negative impact on Melanie.
Makes sense. I mean, constantly being on edge and like worried about, when the next outburst is going to happen can be really draining.
Yeah, so let's say you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, okay, maybe I've seen some of this in my own relationship.
Right.
How do you know if it's actually this anger spike red flag?
Well, the book describes 3 specific signs to look out for.
Okay.
And, as you mentioned, the story of Melanie and Chris really helps to illustrate these. So the first sign is overreacting to minor issues.
Like what kind of thing are we talking about here?
Well, I think we've all experienced this to some degree, right? Like imagine, spilling a glass of milk and suddenly it's World War III.
Right.
It's completely disproportionate to the situation. So, maybe Chris is having a bad day and then Melanie, forgets to put the dishes away or something and he just explodes.
Oh, yeah.
It's that kind of thing where you're like, wait, is this really about the dishes or is there something else going on?
That's interesting. What are some of the other signs that we should be looking for?
So the second sign is verbal aggression.
Okay.
And this can take many forms, yelling, name-calling, using really harsh language, blaming their partner unfairly, putting them down, things like that.
And that can be so hurtful.
Oh, absolutely. It can really chip away at someone's self-esteem.
I was just thinking about how in the book there's that one example where Chris is like putting Melanie down and making her feel responsible for his anger.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
That's got to be just awful.
It is, and it's a form of emotional abuse. That can have a lasting impact on a person.
Right. And what about the third sign?
So the third sign is creating this fear-based atmosphere.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
Right. Your home should be a safe and comfortable space, but when you're constantly worried about setting someone off, it can be really unsettling.
Right, like walking on eggshells all the time.
Exactly. You're always on edge, never knowing what might trigger an outburst, and that can be incredibly draining, both mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, definitely. So let's say you're listening to this and you're realizing, okay, I'm seeing some of these signs in my own relationship. What can you do about it?
That's the big question, right? Because it's one thing to read about Melanie and Chris in a book,
right? But
real life is a lot messier.
It is. So what does the book suggest?
Well, the book actually gives Melanie some strategies to deal with the situation, and I think these can be really helpful for anyone who's going through something similar. So the first thing Melanie does is decide to address the anger management issue head on.
Okay, so how does she go about doing that?
She doesn't just ignore it or hope it goes away. She realizes that it's something that needs to be addressed.
So does she just come right out and say, hey, you've got anger problems?
Well, the book emphasizes the importance of having a calm and non-confrontational conversation.
Okay.
It's not about attacking Chris or making him feel defensive. It's about expressing her concerns in a loving and supportive way and encouraging him to seek professional help.
Like therapy or?
Yeah, like therapy or anger management.
Okay. But what if he's resistant to that? What if he's like, no, I don't need therapy?
That's definitely a possibility. And it's important to remember that you can't force someone to change.
Right.
But you can control your own actions and reactions. So even if Chris isn't willing to seek help right away, Melanie can still start setting boundaries.
Okay, so that's the second strategy.
It's exactly.
It's setting boundaries.
It's not about suppressing anger altogether. It's about setting clear boundaries around acceptable behavior. You know, it's okay to feel frustrated, but that doesn't give anyone the right to lash out.
Right, so how does Melanie go about setting these boundaries?
It starts with communication. She needs to be clear and assertive about what she will and will not tolerate. You know, she could say something like, look, it's okay to be frustrated, but I won't accept being yelled at or called names.
Okay.
It's about drawing a line in the sand and letting Chris know that she deserves to be treated with respect.
But isn't that kind of confrontational?
Well, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. The key is to do it from a place of self-respect, not anger or resentment.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there's that third strategy that you mentioned.
Right, prioritizing safety. And this is so crucial because Melanie's well-being is paramount.
Yeah, for sure.
So she makes sure that she has a support system in place, whether that's friends, family, or a therapist. She also identifies safe spaces where she can go if things escalate.
Okay, so it's like having an exit plan.
Exactly. It's about being prepared and having options so that she doesn't feel trapped or helpless.
Makes sense. So just to recap, we've talked about 3 signs of the anger spike red flag. Overreacting to minor issues, verbal aggression, and creating a fear-based atmosphere.
Right.
And we've also talked about 3 strategies for dealing with it. Addressing the anger management issue head on, setting boundaries, and prioritizing safety.
Exactly.
So before we wrap things up, I wanted to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
We've been talking about all this in the context of, individual relationships.
Right.
But have you ever considered how societal expectations or cultural norms might play a role in how anger is expressed and perceived?
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, like are there certain cultures where anger is more accepted or even encouraged? Or are there societal expectations based on gender that influence how we view anger in men versus women?
I think that's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, it's something to think about. So as you go about your day-to-day, I encourage you to reflect on your own experiences and consider how these broader factors might be influencing your own relationships.
That's a great takeaway.
And remember, you deserve to be in a relationship where you feel safe, respected, and loved.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Bye.